are you, Dr. Robert Enright? How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking.
And let's just start with the first question. What does forgiveness mean? If someone does not ask me to forgive them, do I still need to forgive?
Okay, well, forgiveness, from what I have learned in studying psychology and moral philosophy, is that it's what we call a moral virtue. And all moral virtues deal with goodness toward others. For example, justice, patience, kindness, love, all concern goodness toward others. And forgiveness also is a moral virtue of goodness toward others, but it's radically different from every other moral virtue in that it is goodness toward those who have not been good to us, which makes it controversial, you see. But people tend to misunderstand it because they expect that we will be good to those who are good to us, and they forget about the moral virtue of mercy. And mercy is going beyond justice. It is the extra step, the extra mile, if you will. And so when we are forgiving, we have been unjustly hurt by other people, and we decide to have mercy on them in terms of how we think about them. We work on how we feel about them more positively, seeing them as true human beings, not just define them by what they have done unfairly. And even our behavior can tend to be softer toward them. But at the same time, forgiveness is not excusing the behavior. What happened to us was wrong, is wrong, and will always be wrong. We don't necessarily forget when we forgive, although people use the expression forgive and forget. We simply remember in new ways, so we don't remember with the animosity that grows in the heart. We do not necessarily reconcile with those who have been mean to us when we forgive, because if they continue to be abusive and hurtful to us, we can forgive from the heart, have mercy as best we can, but then not reconcile. And also another thing of what forgiveness is not, it is not abandoning justice. One can forgive and at the same time ask for fairness from the other. But I always suggest try for at least a little forgiveness before you approach someone who's been mean to you, so that your quest for justice is more humane. It's not hate-filled. And so with regard to your question, how about that? If someone does not ask me to forgive them, do I still need to forgive them? Only if you want to. You know, it's one thing that I really, really like about forgiveness. It's always your choice, whether you give it or not. You are not demanded to forgive in any society. In terms of the moral virtue of justice, you are demanded. For example, if you don't stop at a stoplight, it's considered unjust and you'll get a ticket for that. So you have to be just in certain ways, and that's one of the moral virtues where we are obligated. We're not obligated in regular societies at all to offer mercy when we've been hurt. It's our free will choice whenever we want to do it, and there's no rule book that says if you don't, we're going to condemn you. That's what I like about it. I even have a book entitled Forgiveness is a Choice, okay, for that very reason. So let's think about forgiveness as free-willed whenever I am ready to offer goodness to someone who might have broken my heart. And it gets very controversial because most people aren't used to thinking in these kind of terms.
Fantastic. And is forgiveness different from reconciliation?
I just answered that one. That's a good one. It's very different because reconciliation is not a moral virtue. It is a negotiation strategy between two or more people coming together again in mutual trust. You see, if I'm trying to trust another who can't be trusted, then I'm not going to reconcile with that person. And it could also be that you don't reconcile in certain ways. Here's an example. Let's say you have a friend who's a compulsive gambler who keeps taking your money, and you realize you're never getting it back. If the person asks for money again, you don't reconcile in that way, because forgiveness doesn't make you unwise. And so you let justice and forgiveness come up together, and you say no to that. You can still be the person's friend, but watch your back. But there are other cases when a person is terribly abusive, let's say a boss who keeps beating on you day after day after day. You get a new job. You don't have to reconcile with that boss, but you can forgive from the heart, even if you are far away from that employer, far away from that company. You can forgive from the heart by thinking good thoughts about the person, trying to have good feelings toward the person, and reasonable behaviors. Even if you met the person at a party, you could be civil to the person.
And what happens if we do not forgive?
Well, it depends on how deeply our heart has been wounded. I have dedicated over 3 decades to studying people who've been hurt gravely. For example, Suzanne Friedman, who's at the University of Northern Iowa, and I did a study with incest survivors, female incest survivors. That's one of the worst injustices of humankind, where a father or father figure who's supposed to protect violates. And the women came to us clinically depressed, and you know who they didn't like? They didn't like themselves. And when they finally forgave the father, realizing what he did was wrong, is wrong, and will always be wrong, okay? Were careful with their children, with the father, for the idea of reconciliation. Their depression went to normal levels, and they ended up liking themselves. And as another example, we've worked in a men's maximum security prison, and we screened them for deep injustices against them, and they were all clinically angry, anxious, and depressed, okay? Oftentimes connected to what happened to them in childhood with deep abuse against them. They learned to forgive their abusers, and it took about 6 months to do it, and they went to normal levels of anger, anxiety, and depression. And they became normalized. So what forgiveness does, it's like a medicine for the extreme deprivation of emotional health, and can restore your emotional health if you've been treated cruelly by others.
There's a difference between, you're saying, you're just talking that you forgive someone, and you actually do forgive someone, right?
That's right. Proclaiming it doesn't make it so necessarily. You have to go through a process, and that process can take time. For example, with Suzanne Friedman's incest survivor study, she worked one-on-one with each of the 6 incest survivors for an hour a week, until they said, I have forgiven, truly from the heart. And it took 14 months. Okay? And in the maximum security prison, it took 6 months. And so, and sometimes it can take an hour if someone doesn't show up for dinner and you're annoyed with them. But that's not a cruelty to the heart. Okay? So you have to walk through a process and be patient with that. And forgiveness comes with time, and healing comes with it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, can you share a little bit about your work and about forgiveness in society? What does, 1, 2, 3. What ideas or actions do you suggest to help people forgive and make peace with each other?
First of all, they have to understand what forgiveness is. I am continually surprised how infrequently people have discussions about forgiveness. It's almost hidden in societies. And that seems to be the case for a long, long time. For example, when I started studying forgiveness in 1985, there had never been a published study with data gathered on person-to-person forgiveness ever published in a journal ever in psychology. There was almost 100 years of silence. So first of all, I say to people, if you want to learn to forgive, know what it is. Know that you're trying to be good to others, but you won't excuse, you won't forget, you may or may not reconcile, and don't forget about justice. Then we go through a process and say you have to be ready for this. You have to make your own decision, your own free will decision. And if you do, the beginning is to, what I say, do no harm to the other. Because it's much easier to commit to do no harm than to feel merciful feelings towards someone who's brutalized you. But if you say, look, I'm going to try and be bigger than what happened to me, you can then stand there with the decision, I will do no harm. Then comes thinking exercises where we ask, can you broaden your view of the other so the other is more than, in your view, more than what this person did to you? Can you see some good things in the person? Can you see the person's humanity? Can you see that you share humanity? And if so, what does that mean for who you are relative to who this person is? And then we ask people to be aware of any movement of the heart. We call it compassion. And then to stand in the pain without throwing it back to the other. Because as Gandhi famously said, if we keep taking an eye for an eye, the whole world will be blind. Okay? And so if one person who's forgiving can stand in the pain without throwing it back to the other, that is the beginning, you see, of a reduction in resentment. And then we ask, how can you be good to the other, even if it's a good statement about the person to others, or maybe donating a little money to charity in the person's name. You see, that's curative, because you, instead of reacting through resentment, you're reacting through goodness, which tends to melt the resentment, and eventually people take a look inside the heart and say, you know what? I'm not nearly as angry as I used to be. And one woman said to me the following. She said, I started as a victim. And then as I started forgiving, I saw myself as a survivor. And as I continued with forgiving, I now see myself as a thriver, where she got her life back. And so did the incest survivors. So did the men in maximum security corrections. Many of them went to medium security because they were less of a threat. Why? They weren't taking their anger out on others.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. Now, let's talk about Charlie Kirk and Tyler Robinson, who is said to have killed him. Do you have an idea of what kind of a person Robinson is, just in general terms? And do you think this was a political crime or more of a psychological crime? In your opinion, what happened there?
Okay, from what I could tell in studying the media, Tyler Robinson, from the media's report only, became a confused person because he spent so much time on certain internet options that he became very enraged at political ideas that disagreed with him. And he saw Charlie Kirk as a threat to his own freedom of expression and how he would live his life. So is that a political issue? Well, was it a political forum? But remember, this began to sink into his heart. So it became a psychological issue where the animosity, the anger, started to grow in him. And you could see that because of what was actually inscribed on the bullets. On the bullets were really very negative things against politically conservative views. So it does look like that it started politically and then just was infused into his heart, and that probably, and I'm not judging him because I don't know, but it probably seemed to turn into enough anger where he felt justified in taking a human life.
Was Charlie Kirk a threat to Tyler Robinson?
Charlie Kirk's ideas were a threat to Tyler Robinson only because Tyler Robinson was interpreting it that way. Because you see, Charlie Kirk wasn't actually going to be a lawmaker and saying you can't do X, Y, or Z, whatever he wanted to do. Charlie Kirk was simply speaking against it, and he was using logic. And so there was a perception of this, but in reality, given that Charlie Kirk is not a lawmaker, he wasn't a true threat to his freedom.
Could it be that Tyler Robinson somehow in the back of his mind thought that Charlie Kirk someday would become president and then an enforcement of his own peculiar ideas?
That's right. But remember, we cannot predict the future. We cannot predict that Charlie Kirk indeed was going to become president of the United States. We don't even know if he wanted that. See? And so to take his life now because of what might happen, does that mean when people have children, they're going to come home from work with the idea, the children might act up at supper time, so I'm going to yell at them before supper? No, because we cannot predict the future. So he made a huge error, if that was a motivation, in trying to change the future he had no control over, nor could he truly predict it with any degree of accuracy.
So can we make the case that most murders, if not all, they are pathological cases per se? Well, in respect of what the person does or say, when you have the murder instinct, you're going to do it, you're going to interpret it wrong, and you're going moving forward and just go ahead and perpetrate what is more like an underlying pathological state of mind.
I think that's a very good way of saying it, Havah, actually, because really murder is the taking of a life that deserves to live. Okay, and so we can see in, let's call it a just war, if people are making war on you, and let's say we're in a little island and people are making war on us, it is perfectly legitimate to try and defend ourselves, and we might take lives in that sense, and that's perfectly legitimate because we could be extinguished, you see. But with regard to this other way, where people are murdering others because they simply either don't like them or don't like even other people and they're displacing it on them, is wrong. I mean, here's an example of displacement. I mentioned that we worked in a maximum security correctional institution. One gentleman who was deeply abused in childhood was so angry he was in there for life because he took out his anger from childhood on 30 people and murdered 30 innocent people. And he was suspected of murdering 100. And we did work with him, you see. And we did calm him down in terms of his anger, anxiety, and depression. Certainly too late for those 30 or 100. But in terms of murder, as you're explaining it, and I think correctly, none of them deserved any of this. That wasn't a just war, nor was it a just war against Charlie Kirk because he didn't have a knife or a gun pointed at Tyler Robinson.
So for those who act aggressively, so could we make the case that there are certainly a neurological basis to it?
We could probably say that for some, but it probably would be very rare. Okay, here's an example of what I mean. I'll kind of prove it to you. If that were the case, in which is more of a materialistic philosophical view of crime, then no one would necessarily be, when they're accused, actually be responsible for what they did because they couldn't help it because of brain wiring. And if that's true, then you would think when you have a jury of peers they would not convict a person because a person did not choose to do so. And if that were the case, when people look at what they say crimes of insanity, we would see many, 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 many of them, and we don't. We see juries most of the time saying this person is guilty because of the person's own choice to behave in this way. So the vast majority of the jury cases are saying this person did this out of free will. That's why we have juries. That's why we have jurisprudence. That's why we have judges, because we're trying to stop those who are making as free will decisions to do bad as forgivers are doing free will decisions to be good. Without free will, let's face it, our justice system makes no sense.
Thank you so much. Very insightful, very, very interesting. Now, moving forward towards the end of our interview, what do you think about Erica Kirk saying in public that she forgave Tyler Robinson? Should she have done this in private instead?
Okay. Let's again go back to our earliest conversation today with what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is a free will choice. It's up to you to whether you want to forgive or not. If that's true, then it should be up to each one of us as free will individuals to do with that forgiveness what we wish to do. And we can proclaim it if we want. We can keep it silent if we want, or we can wait if we want. But we must give free will forgiveness its due, and therefore give Erica Kirk her due. And as long as she's not doing it to manipulate anything, which I hope she was not, and was simply doing it from her heart, she has all the freedom in the world to proclaim that, because it might be an encouragement for others to forgive, for example, in their family or in their work. And so there might be a learning period here where she was doing good for the rest of society rather than manipulating.
Thank you. And finally, should society forgive Tyler Robinson as a whole? If so, can you explain the difference between forgiving a crime and punishing it?
Okay. Well, there's a difference in this idea of crime and forgiveness, because now we're in the realm not of forgiveness so much, but of what we call legal pardon. So when we legally pardon someone and say you're not going to get the death penalty, the judge is not the one who was offended. The judge was not the one who was deeply personally hurt. And if the judge should step down from that. And so making the decision of whether Tyler Robinson lives or gets the death penalty is going to be up to courts who are neutral in terms of being hurt. Forgiveness belongs to those who have been hurt. Who has been hurt by the Charlie Kirk issue? There's a philosopher in Canada who makes these three important philosophical distinctions, which I think is important for your question. She makes a distinction between primary, secondary, and tertiary forgiveness, and here's the difference. Primary forgiveness is when you have been personally hurt and you decide to forgive the person who's hurt you. Secondary forgiveness is when a loved one has been hurt and it hurts you because the loved one has been hurt. And then we have tertiary forgiveness, and here's where the Charlie Kirk issue comes in, where Trudy Govier, the philosopher, says, we can consider forgiving if we see bad things happening out there, and it has nothing to do with us in that we don't know any of the people involved personally at all, but it hurts us enough where it hurts our hearts and we can go ahead and forgive. So for those who've been deeply hurt by the death of Charlie Kirk, by Tyler Robinson, and these people know none of these people, Trudy Govier would say that's tertiary forgiveness and it's perfectly reasonable to go ahead and forgive. A lot of people would be indifferent one way or the other. They might feel badly about it, but not, cut to the heart where they have to forgive. But, they're disappointed and they're somewhat angry, but it's not going to lead to anxiety or depression, for example. But if it is, tertiary forgiveness can be considered for those who are ready. Okay? Now, for those who are thinking, well, he deserved it, and I'm not going to judge them on that, there's going to be conflict. Because they're going to say, what do you mean, forgive him? This doesn't make any sense. But we have to remember it's each person's choice whether to forgive or whether not to forgive. So the tertiary forgivers, I'd say, go for it, because it's going to help you in your heart because you feel so badly and so brokenhearted about what happened.
Thank you so much. And before you go, could you just comment about forgiveness through the eyes of Christianity?
Forgiveness through the eyes of Christianity is extremely important. Okay? For example, when people pray the Lord's Prayer or the Our Father, they say in part of that prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And so there's a link between being forgiven by God and learning to forgive others. You see, it becomes a community between God and the person. And so it really is very, very important. And the Catechism of the Council of Trent, which goes back to 1566, and that's considered one of the most clear-headed catechisms ever produced, united forgiveness in terms of its highest level to moral love, or loving others sacrificially like Jesus did. And the Catechism of the Council of Trent says that forgiveness is so important that if you don't forgive, you know who you're hurting, they say? Yourself. You're hurting yourself more than the one who victimized you. And they encourage pastors to bring forgiveness into the realm of Christianity, into churches, so that more and more people understand it, practice it, make it a norm in their family and in their churches, and it would be for the greater good, because remember the link between being forgiven and forgiving. These are a team. Whenever anyone says the Lord's Prayer, for example, in Holy Mass, they say that, and so they are making a commitment to forgive. We ought to know what it is, and we ought to practice it more diligently.
Thank you so much. This was so insightful. I look forward to, propagating your interview. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. I wish you the very best with it.